Hi, I'm Dan, and welcome to Polar Currency and video number 80, Obsolete Presidential Bank Notes, Part 2. About 4 years ago, I decided to research and see if I could put a collection together of obsolete banknotes with as many U.S. presidents on them as I could find. There have been about 17 potential presidents that have had their portraits on obsolete banknotes. There were only 17 because obsoletes became, obsolete when the U.S. began issuing paper currency in 1862, making it unprofitable for banks to issue their own currency. For more information on obsolete banknotes, check out my video, Obsolete Beauty, What Are Obsolete Banknotes? This is a really interesting and maybe a little bit overlooked group of notes. Some I found a lot of information on, and others not so much. All right, let's get started. The fifth President, James Monroe, had his small portrait appear at the center bottom of this 1840 to 1860s era $1 note from the Piscataqua Exchange Bank of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. The bank is named after the Piscataqua River that empties into the Atlantic Ocean, forming a tidal estuary that became a natural harbor. Portsmouth was incorporated in 1653 and became one of the busiest colonial ports and shipbuilding cities in the early days of the colonies. The Piscataqua Exchange Bank was incorporated in 1824. The building was originally built in 1803. After many alterations, it still stands as one of the nation's oldest purpose-built bank buildings. Up until 1977, it was the oldest building used continuously to house banking operations. This building served 6 different banks for 174 years, and the upstairs was once the law office of President Franklin Pierce. It is kind of cool that I found an 1850 map of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and the bank is listed on the map. Portsmouth, being a prominent seaport, is reflected in the vignettes that flank the main center vignette. I'm no mid-19th century ship expert, but I believe the left ship being built is a small frigate or maybe a ketch. The right depicts a brig or a schooner sailing out to sea, but these are just guesses on my very non-nautical part. The main vignette is that of an angel holding a numeric 1 seated in front of what appears to be a few bales of something behind a barrel. Typical shipping trade items for the time period. The larger far left and far right engravings are what are referred to as maidens, young nameless women who randomly appear on obsolete banknotes, I guess to fill space. These images served as decorations and sometimes conveyed patriotic or symbolic meanings, but weren't necessarily tied to the region, a specific historical event, or person. The maiden on the left is holding a sickle, most likely representing agriculture and harvest. There are other guesses, could represent death or a more modern meaning like communism attached to the sickle. The right maiden, no clue what's going on there, just a girl hanging out dressed in her Sunday best. I don't understand why these maidens were used at all. I'd rather see a dog or an important landmark that people revere even though it no longer exists. This note was produced by Toppin, Carpenter and Company of New York and Boston. When designing banknotes, printers could have banks select stock engravings from basically a catalog book like this earlier Toppin and Carpenter book, but many banks had their own engravings commissioned also. James Monroe has only made one appearance on U.S. currency, and it was a good one with the series 1878, 1880, and 1891 $100 silver certificates. There are only 10 Friedberg numbers, and all of them are extremely rare. If you're even thinking about one of them, you better have at least 25 grand just to start, and that's for like a VG8. The last $100 silver certificate of any series recently sold at Stack's Bowers. It was an 1891 graded very fine 30 for just over $43,000. Besides the rarity, the note was printed with the blue security threads and blue stain across the upper part of the back of the paper. The backs of these series, 1878 and 1880, have become known as blackbacks because of the ink color, which was supposedly originally a dark blue, but the iron content oxidized over time, turning the ink to dark black or even brown. Besides gold certificates, they have been the only notes issued by the BEP that did not use green ink. Presidential Fast Facts. James Monroe was the last founding father to serve as president. He's only second to George Washington when it comes to dominating presidential elections. Monroe received 68% of the vote in the 1816 election, and he ran unopposed in the 1820 race. Unheard of. He got 81% of the vote. Only one cranky elector from New Hampshire kept Monroe from a unanimous win in the Electoral College. You knew it had to be a guy from New Hampshire, probably the original Old Man of the Mountain, which again, no longer exists. And one last fast fact, like Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, Monroe also died on the 4th of July. The sixth president of the United States was John Quincy Adams, the son of second president John Adams. He appears on the 1860s $100 remainder note issued by the City Bank of New Haven, Connecticut. The City Bank of New Haven was incorporated in 1831, and post-Civil War it operated as a state bank until merging into the National New Haven Bank in 1915. That's all I could find, but a fast fact here, New Haven was founded in 1638 and came close to becoming one of the original British North American colonies, but was politically outmaneuvered by Connecticut. Adams' portrait appears in the lower right, and George Washington, well, he's over here on the left. The center vignette is a landscaped engraving titled Churches on the New Haven City Green next to the State House. That city green, that's still a thing today in pretty much the center of New Haven. The note was designed and printed by the American Banknote Company of New York, and basically I could blow my nose in it. I mean, it's tissue paper. It's so thin, I don't know how these things circulated more than once. What's really interesting about the note is the denomination overprint on the reverse. Normally this is done on the front, but the overprint was actually done on the reverse. This is one of the reasons I chose this note, because John Quincy Adams does show up on quite a few obsolete banknotes. Just like today, many obsolete notes were printed in series, and the 100 of the City Bank of New Haven was the largest issue, along with the 1, 2, and 3, 5 and 10, and the 20 and 50. They were printed on sheets of 4 notes, and the 1s through 10s were printed with the orange-red overprint on the front, with the ink bleeding through the micro-thin paper reading backwards on the reverse. But as I said before, the 20, 50, and 100 denominations, the overprint was printed on the back. They're beautiful notes and are very affordable in ungraded single notes and uncut sheets, which go for about $250. Like James Monroe, John Quincy Adams only made one appearance on U.S. federal currency, the Series 1869 $500 legal tender rainbow note. He got replaced on the Series 1874 legal tender with somebody named Major General Joseph King Mansfield. But it's a damn rare note. According to the Comprehensive Catalog of U.S. Paper Money by Gene Hessler and Carlson Chambly, there were 87,980 $500 1869 legal tender notes issued, and only 4 are known to exist today. And there's only one note available to private collectors, and that sold for $1.4 million back in early 2019. Why so rare? It's said that in the early 1870s, these were withdrawn from circulation due to deceptive counterfeits. Really? Deceptive counterfeits. Isn't that a counterfeit's main purpose, being deceptive? And who is spending all these $500 counterfeit bills in 1869? It's not like Pa Ingalls was passing fake $500 bills down at Olson's Mercantile in Walnut Grove, Minnesota. Or maybe he was. Presidential Fast Facts. John Quincy Adams is the only ex-U.S. president elected to Congress. He served in the House of Representatives for 17 years from 1831 to 1848. It's highly questionable if the Smithsonian Institution would be here today without John Quincy Adams. He played the major role to ensure the founding of the institution in 1846. Adams was also the very first U.S. president photographed in 1843, when he was 76 years old. He wasn't president at the time, but still. The Citizens Bank of Louisiana $100 banknote is simple yet complex at the same time. The center vignette depicts the allegorical figures of art and science admiring the bust of George Washington, who's being sculpted by a third female figure. To the right is a typical random portrait of a maiden, and to the left is President Andrew Jackson. The remainder note has a bold green overprint with Roman numerals and the word 100 in the lower center, and was produced by the American Banknote Company. The back actually has a design, which is rare for obsolete banknotes of the time, but not for the Citizens Bank of Louisiana. The highly detailed red-orange back has the Citizens Bank of Louisiana in French across the top, with a center portrait of a figure that hasn't been identified by either the Kelly or the Whitman Encyclopedia books. I did find a thread that it could be Hernando de Soto, the Spanish conquistador who is credited with being the first documented European to have discovered the Mississippi River in 1541. This discovery is portrayed on the backs of the original and 1875 $10 national banknotes and the 1918 $500 Federal Reserve note. The 1860s era $100 note is from a series that ranges from the 1 denomination to the 100. The 1s, 2s, and 3s were printed on one sheet, but the Citizens Bank of Louisiana issued so much currency that the remaining denominations were issued in full sheets of 4 notes. Keep in mind that the value of $100 in 1860 was just under $4,000. I mean, that's a lot of money. The Citizens Bank of Louisiana of New Orleans was chartered in 1833 and was the largest financial institution of its kind with an initial capitalization of $12 million, second only in the nation to the Second Bank of the United States. By 1847, the bank achieved a well-known status as a sound financial institution. Its notes were honored throughout the Mississippi Valley and nationally, a rare thing for paper banknotes at the time, but it didn't last forever. The bank could not recover after the Civil War and went into bankruptcy by 1874. The Citizens Bank most famous note is the so-called Dixie note, with the story of the South being named Dixie after this particular circa 1860s note. I find this to be highly doubtful because this note was not issued until 1859. More than likely, it was an earlier Dix or Dix note, if you want to say 10 in French correctly, like this $10 bill issued in 1836. That's much more likely to be credited with the term Dixie. Nonetheless, the Citizens Bank of Louisiana has a long history of issuing banknotes and take up 11 pages in Volume 7 of the Whitman Encyclopedia of Obsolete Paper Money. The bank was located in the French Quarter at the corner of Royal and Iberville Streets, and today it's a Walgreens. But it does have a plaque on the door entrance commemorating the location that, in my opinion, perpetuates the bad Dixie myth. Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States, is a common figure on post-Civil War U.S. currency. For that matter, he was a very popular figure on obsolete banknotes. Jackson technically appeared on the very first federal currency with the 1861 $50 interest-bearing note. In 1869, he was placed on the $5 legal tender woodchopper rainbow note. This design, sans the rainbow, was issued until 1928. Jackson next appeared on the extremely rare 1878 $10,000 legal tender note, and then the 1882 and 1900 $10,000 gold certificates. He was then placed on the 1914 $10 Federal Reserve note. He was on the 1915-1918 $10 Federal Reserve Bank Notes and the 1923 $10 legal tender note. When the notes became small size after 1928, Jackson has owned the $20 denomination going on the $20 Federal Reserve note, the gold certificate, the National Bank note, the Federal Reserve Bank note, and he remains on the Federal Reserve note to this very day. But that may be changing in the next few years. Presidential Fast Facts. Andrew Jackson was the target of the very first presidential assassination attempt in 1835. The assassin tried to shoot Jackson, but his gun misfired. The furious 67-year-old president then nearly beat him to death with his walking cane. During the scuffle, the assassin managed to pull out a second loaded pistol and pulled the trigger. It also misfired. How's that for some luck? Anyway, Jackson openly opposed paper money, instead preferring hard specie as currency. That makes his controversy about his portrait remaining on the 20 a bit ironic. I'm sure if you asked him, he would gladly give up his spot. The $50 Watervliet Bank of West Troy, New York is bordered on the left by a large box with the text 50. Large Roman numerals surround the center vignette, which most likely depict the Cohoes Falls that's just 3 miles north of Watervliet on the Mohawk River. The center bank block is kind of unusual for using two large fonts for the bank name. The far right, in between the large $50 denominations, is the portrait of Martin Van Buren. At the bottom center is just a tiny vignette of a very old steam locomotive. The Watervliet Bank issued only one series of banknotes between 1836 and 1841 in 7 denominations ranging from the 1 to 100. Curiously, a 20 was not issued. This remainder banknote was produced by Rawdon, Wright & Hatch of New York and not printed particularly well, but it was still early for obsolete banknote printing and the design was actually kind of modern. The town of Watervliet, New York was founded in 1788 along the Hudson River and is basically the eastern point of the Erie Canal that connects the Hudson River to Lake Erie. Watervliet sits at the junction of the Mohawk and Hudson Rivers and is Dutch for flowing water. I found very little information about the bank. I only found one thread that the Watervliet Bank was hit hard by the Panic of 1837, limped along for 5 years before succumbing to the effects of the Depression and closing in 1841. Watervliet does have the distinction of having the oldest continuously active arsenal in the United States since 1813. So there's that. The 8th President of the United States, Martin Van Buren, never appeared on post-Civil War U.S. currency, and I could only identify 2 obsolete notes that have his portrait. I feel lucky that I was able to get the Watervliet Bank 50 as the notes are scarce. So that's pretty much it for Martin Van Buren when it comes to paper currency. Presidential fast facts. Martin Van Buren was kind of a curious character. He's the only president that spoke English as a second language. Born in 1782 in Kinderhook, New York, he was the first president born in a state of the United States, not a colony. Central upstate New York along the Hudson River was originally settled by the Dutch, and the language remained primary. Van Buren was a lawyer, but his only real occupation was politics, being in one office or another for over 30 years. He served one term as president from 1837 to 1841, but he did run unsuccessfully for office 2 more times in 1844 and 48. And finally, Van Buren created one of the first political machines in party politics in the Albany, New York area. He and his Democratic allies or cronies actively maintained party discipline in both the state of New York and on the national level, using political favors to influence people, which eventually led to the spoils system. Thanks for that, Martin Van Buren, but then again, I guess some other schmuck would have figured it out sooner or later. That's it for Obsolete Presidential Banknotes Part 2. The 4 presidents presented some challenges in collecting the obsolete notes, and for that matter, researching the banks that issued them. It's also rare for the average person to have any clue of who the presidents were from that time period, aside from Andrew Jackson. But that time period was critical for growth and usage of paper money. The population of the U.S. doubled in the 20 years between James Monroe and Martin Van Buren, and it was still 10 years away from the discovery of gold and silver in California. Paper was needed to fill the void that coins could not fulfill for daily commercial transactions. So that's it. As always, I appreciate your time. Please take the time to subscribe to the channel, hit the thumbs up button, and feel free to leave a comment or a question. We'll see you next time, and thanks for checking in.